Thank you very much. It's often difficult to come after two very excellent talks on a man I came to know over the course of the last 20 years. These fine speakers have studied him far more than I have, but I was immediately attracted to his works. And as a Californian, I find it extremely disappointing, to say the least, that most don't know about Thomas Starr King and the profound impact he had. When they teach California history in fourth grade, it's mostly about the missions, and they kind of jump ahead. And so we get kind of a abbreviated version of our California history. So much that as adults, when you start speaking about Thomas Starr King or the involvement of California in the Civil War, you hear crickets, blank stares, and then in amazement, wow, I didn't even know. So that's why we're here, to find out and to maybe correct the wrongs of how we were taught history. Or what I like to talk about is context in history. My great interest is how Freemasonry intersects the social life. Nowadays, we have kind of an upsurge in interest in Freemasonry, and many men are attracted to our portals because they admire someone that was great in their life, or they believe that they will achieve some sort of enlightenment. Well, I think the former sentiment is far more pure. Achieving enlightenment, what does that mean? Freemasonry is one of those organizations that is sort of nebulous, it's slippery, it changes, it's not monolithic. We may think it's monolithic, but as soon as we proclaim something to be true, we find in another land a different expression that turns our conception on its head. So what is Freemasonry? I don't think we'll ever know, or if we do, it's within our heart, and it's what we do in our lives, and this is what we are learning today about Thomas Starr King. In tying this all together, I want to start with a quote by Alphonse Mucha, who you may know as a very prominent artist of the early 20th century. He was also a very prominent Czech Freemason and also the sovereign Grand Commander of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Czechoslovakia. He says, "A Masonic lodge is not a club where precious time and brotherly togetherness are wasted in chattering about everyday things, social matters and the like, which could be just as well discussed everywhere, or elsewhere, I should say. Nor is Masonry a monastery where every monk builds his own salvation in somber secrecy and isolation from the world. No, our work is strictly self-discipline, so that we may set a shining example to others in our land whom we wish to draw towards our light." I can't think of anything better to compare this to than Brother Thomas Starr King, in which his life and ministry, like I said before, are surprisingly only known to a few, despite the profound impact this man had upon both the United States and California. It does seem strange that a man of such magnitude could be allowed to fade so far into memory, especially since he fought for a patriotic cause that would ultimately culminate with the sacrifice of his own life. His life was lived in the true tradition of an apostle, or apostolos, one who was sent away to teach and delight his fellow man in the ways of both the spirit and the intellect until his bright life was eclipsed by exhaustion and illness at 39 years of age. Thomas Starr King was a Mason for less than 3 years, and we may never know what could have become of him had he lived. Nevertheless, if what was written about him is carefully examined, along with his own personal writings, and compared to his 1863 Masonic oration, we may get yet a further glimpse into this man. What is clear, though, is that California Freemasonry certainly found in Thomas a famous, and already famous, and effective orator. Freemasonry, California Freemasonry's leaders were some of the most successful citizens of the young state, and like Starr King, many were from New England and had undoubtedly heard of the young minister's fame, and he became one of them. Thomas became one of them when he arrived in California, within an ever-widening social and intellectual circle of influence, which assisted in his campaigns for Lincoln, for Yosemite, and raising $1.5 million for the United States Sanitary Commission. The lodge which Starr King joined about a year after he arrived in California was also a new lodge. It had been formed by members formerly of Occidental Number 22, which was one of the big powerhouse lodges in San Francisco. Before I get into what the dynamic of what Oriental 144 and Occidental 22 is, I think it's necessary to kind of reiterate what we heard last night about what San Francisco was. California is a very, very young state. It is the Wild West. Even in a city such as San Francisco, which by the 1860s had about 10 years in of the madness that was the gold rush, it's still dirty and dusty, violent. You could walk up one street with sidewalks made of barrel tops, turn the corner, have to climb over a wrecked carriage, and dance around across the street on bottle tops. It was once said that no matter how wealthy you were or how poor you were, the mud was the great equalizer. So when crossing the street, people were splattered with mud. So they may be clean on one side and they're completely dirty on the other. Men walked in the middle of the streets to avoid the dark alleyways of getting their throats slashed or shot by various gangs which terrorized and at times during a 2-year period in 1848 burned the city down about 5 times. So this is the dynamic, and here is a growing population. Order out of chaos is about to happen, and it was the people or the men that formed the Grand Lodge of California that were truly these men to create order. If you look at old pictures of San Francisco, look at the Masonic temple that was built on Post and Montgomery. This area was now becoming the mercantile district when previously everything kind of flowed out of Portsmouth Square, which is now part of Chinatown. Post and Montgomery was this giant neo-Gothic cathedral dedicated to Freemasonry. And then you have the rest of San Francisco, very low-level houses. Some are still made out of wood and cotton and oiled paper. Around this time, San Francisco is also learning how to build in fireproof ways. But this is the world that Starr King came to. And these are the groups of men that he surrounded himself with. Phoenix Lodge 144, then Oriental 144, had broken away from Occidental 22, and you could see there was already conflict because of their names. Totally the opposite. Oriental 144 was pro-Union. Occidental 22 was filled with Confederate sympathizers. This was not a rare thing. Freemasonry in California was experiencing these divisions in their lodges. As far north as Weed, as far south as San Diego, you had lodges that were separated by ideology. And in fact, most of the state had Confederate sympathies. Many of them came from the South. So this is a dynamic that I think Starr King already knew he was coming into. But the causes he took up were at the fount of what was beating in his heart, the overarching principles of organization and unity that emanated from the spiritual creative breath of God, and which flowed into nature's innermost recesses and the soul of mankind. Thomas's biographers speak of him as a biblical prophet or apostle because of his fierce commitment towards humanitarianism, and to that end he seemed to give his life in an act of self-sacrifice. His short life unveils itself as a preparation to his 4 short years of activity in California, where he found the culmination of his long-held convictions for environmentalism and his passionate claims for social justice and abolition. California was a lush and beautiful land filled with hardened men, and it was a fertile ground for his intellect, kindness, and humor. When he prepared to go west, he stated rather self-effacingly that the journey was to, quote, see if I'm good for anything. However, to the ministerial search committee in San Francisco, he wrote confidently, I shall go to you in the hope of using all the powers that may be continued to me for your permanent strength as a liberal Christian parish. Thomas had already achieved notable success in New England. He did not necessarily need to go to California, but he certainly wanted to be able to support his family without having to lecture every night, which he was doing. However, he seemed to have burning with him something that he could not yet articulate. And the causes of ethnic and social freedom that he championed on the East Coast would inspire his cause célèbre in California as the fires of the Civil War began to blow its smoke west, and the people of that young state grew restless and agitated at the friction between the North and the South, along with the threats of secession. It was like being on a rocking boat. Secede into an independent republic, or join the Confederacy, or stay with the Union. The state's chief resource, gold, would become an attractive bargaining chip for the fate of the Union Army. To Thomas Starr King, California was a cornerstone in a fight for the preservation of the soul of America's Union, not just geographically, but spiritually. These themes of spiritual and physical union would be reflected in his regular sermons around the state. They were overtly transcendental. His lush words describe spiritual destinies hidden within the trees and the rocks and in the hearts of men. They spoke of a love encompassing all of humanity, linked with a bond of sincere affection. You can start to hear the Masonic themes going on here. But yet this was before he was a Mason. Yet the craft is not the inventor or sole arbiter of these lessons. And Thomas already had a deep and abiding belief in these precepts long before he became a Freemason. The young Universalist minister was certainly a rare individual. Not yet 5 feet tall and physically weak, his kind eyes, boyish smile, and staggering humility was contradicted by a powerful, booming voice, an eloquent prose, and an aura of a man who was older and wiser beyond his years. Indeed, his life, as recorded by biographers and also alluded to earlier on, is almost a tale of destiny, reminiscent of the biblical apostles and prophets, or the heroes of classical mythology. A highly intelligent preacher's son from New England, he dropped out of school to support his family after the death of his father. And while working as a bookkeeper, school teacher, and at other jobs, he continued a rigorous self-study in classical literature with the help of his mother, and was eventually called to the pulpit, where he was seen as a very special person, described by Henry Parker as, quote, a rare, sweet spirit with the gift of tongues. Starr King not only had an innate capacity for grace and kindness, but also a fierce social and ethical commitment that would earn him an instant reputation. Though I weigh only 120 pounds, when I'm mad, I weigh a ton. It was his calling to California that was to take everything he had previously learned and translate it into not just a message intended to keep California in the Union, but rather into a holy cause of not just words, but a philanthropic action, to which he engaged vigorously. To Starr King, the Civil War was not just a war of men, but representative of the survival of society and the struggle between good and evil. In 1844, he wrote to a friend, quote, have you ever reflected on the intimate connection between revelation and philosophy? By many they are put in contrast, set in opposition, yet they mutually explain and reciprocally aid each other. This transcendental concept of the unity of mankind and of divine creation was a reoccurring theme within Starr King's works when he spoke out against the treatment of workers, the African Americans, or the Chinese. Wherever we find many races brought together, here God has his greatest work to do. There is room for the noblest work of Christianity. The Almighty has a great mission for this nation. Here the church is to proclaim the equality of the races. Wherever the oppressed are congregated, there Christ is present, and not on the side of power. To Thomas, there seemed to be no difference between politics and religion, or with mankind, the natural world, and the presence of the deity. To work against this unity by way of slavery and war was an affront to the whole of creation. As he stated in his 1863 Grand Oration before the assembled Masons of California, we are not intended to be separate private persons, but rather fibers, fingers, and limbs. The aim of religion is not to perfect us as persons, looking at each of us apart from others. The Creator does not propose to polish souls like so many pins, each one dropping off clean and shiny, with no more organic relations to each other than pins of a card. There can be no such thing as justice until men in large masses are rightly related to each other. And moreover, wherever there is power, there is trust and duty. The preacher's business is with spiritual laws, and their bearing upon or their application with the duties and the actions of common life. These quotes will immediately be recognized by Masons here present as reminiscent of the lessons taught within the degree systems. Indeed, the language that comprises American Masonic ritual was codified only a few years before Thomas was born. It was just as much a product of those early years of the Republic as was Unitarianism and Universalism. And furthermore, the transcendentalist writers such as Thoreau and Emerson moved in the same intellectual circles, though they were not known to be Masons. Thomas was part and parcel of this environment. Already known as a naturalist before he arrived in California, he immediately took to his new home's natural beauty and campaigned vigorously for its preservation. His written word is as lush as the forests and mountains he describes, and the metaphorical use of natural imagery is so effective that they send the listener into a hypnotic trance as he or she imagines themselves whisked into the atomic particles holding all matter together, then into the cells of the body, and then further into the heavenly spheres. According to Sherry Prudhomme, quote, in the early days of Unitarianism and Universalism in America, there was no field of environmental ethics, no concept of studying the interplay of theology and ecology. Therefore, to understand the history of Unitarian and Universalist theologies and ethics related to the environment, one must do some sleuthing. Thomas Starr King was one of the few thinkers and socio-political leaders of his day with explicit affection for the natural world. For these reasons, his work is a welcome entryway. Starr King's only Grand Oration, giving in 1863, artfully uses the metaphors of the stonemason's work and natural imagery as a basis to propagate his own ideas of union and organization that could be easily seen as an observation of the prevailing wartime socio-political climate. However, his oration is not merely a crafty pulpit. His prose is forcefully sincere, and it is from this document that we can truly understand how he honestly viewed Freemasonry as a beneficent instrument of the natural order of creation, an organization that was the agent of unity, not just nationally, but across the globe and in the spirit of mankind. I will read to you an excerpt from this oration. The Masonic organization is far more remarkable and wonderful than the noblest edifice it has ever added to the landscape of history. Let us pause, brethren, on the word organization. That is the great word of the world. The Almighty is the organizer. He creates elements in order to mingle and fraternize them in composition and products. In the original chaos, matter was unorganized. All the marvels of beauty, all the victories of life are exhibitions and triumphs of organizing force. The most fascinating chapters of science are those which unveil to us the vast fields which forces traverse that sustain highest forms of life upon the globe. We soon find in nature that no element or force exists unrelated. It is in this harness with other elements for a common labor and an interchange of service for a common end. No man liveth to himself. Whether one member suffer, all the members suffer, or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. How good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. When a compacted unity of living beings is seen, one of the most precious objects for which the world was built is attained. A large, well-ordered family is such a jewel. A neighborhood at peace and free from scandal is, or rather should I say, would be a still more precious jewel of the same quality. A state, a nation so constructed that the forces of all ranks of its inhabitants should be brought into play and the rights of all ranks should be saved from pressure, would be a more marvelous and more inspiring structure than the material order and harmony of our solid globe. It is in the light of this principle that the value and nobleness of Masonry appear. Everywhere order is of the great interest. What humanity needs is the fulfillment of these indications of nature, freedom with order, a proper consciousness of worth in every breast, a recognition by each man of the worth and claims of every other, and an acknowledgement by all of a common and controlling law. This idea of order fulfilled in the architecture of nature is committed as a trust to our fraternity and the proper reverence for it is poured out continually. Organization and order. In preserving these, we are in harmony with the will and work of the sovereign architect, published in the harmony, dignity, and peace of nature. And one other word must be spoken, so familiar, so precious to the Masonic ear and heart. Charity. In nature, which speaks the wisdom and character of the invisible spirit, organization is not for the sake of wisdom and skill chiefly. Order is not for the sake of law and obedience chiefly, but all for the sake of charity. There is harmony and stability that there may be breadth of bounty, constancy in giving wherever there is need. Within every district of nature, there is beneficence to all the need within that district, and then a pouring out of alms into a general fund of bounty and cheer. Do we ever get tired of the toils and tax of charity? Suppose the sun did. What does it receive in homage or obedience from the orbs that swing round him in comparison with what he gives, all his light, all his heat, all his vitality for the blessing of 80 worlds? Shall we complain of the demand upon our treasuries or our private purses for the sacred funds of the Masonic Board of Relief? What if the sea grumbled at the assessment which the mighty gun, the most worshipful Grand Master of the system, levies on his substance? Every day the sun touches its stores with its wand of light and says, give, give. And it obeys. Evaporation is its tax, constantly demanded, constantly given. Remember, brethren, that every cloud you see, whether stretched in a beautiful bar across the east at sunrise or hanging in pomp over the gorgeous pavilion of the retiring day, is part of the contribution for the general relief of nature assessed by the lordly sun. The water which the ocean keeps is salt. Pour a bucket of it on a hill of corn or a garden bed, and it kills it. The water which the ocean gives is fresh and descends in blessing after it rides in a beauty or majesty on the viewless couriers of the air. Nature tells us to give is to live. American Freemasons delight in associating the craft's moral lessons with the deeds of great patriots of the Republic. Indeed, many feel that holding membership in the order brings them closer to their revered founders. Through their association, they form a kinship that other citizens do not. Thomas Starr King should be no different. We share the same revolutionary ancestors he did. Indeed, he was a contemporary of some, and like them perceived humanity and unity in a way that perhaps we today do not understand. Even though we may have the answer through the simple hints of these men's attraction to the fraternity, Freemasonry was certainly prevalent in their era, and joining it was an act that was so common that it could be expected that a man of certain status and temperament would associate with the fraternity. Given the historical context, it would be vain to suggest that Freemasonry was the force that could claim sole ownership and influence over their hearts and minds. It is their noted enthusiastic appreciation for the fraternity beyond a simple moral or benefit society that deserves some serious investigation. And I'll leave you with the last words of Brother Thomas Starr King. How good and how precious it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. May it continue, brothers, and widen through our fidelity and service and beneficence. God preserve our organization, guard our order, inspire our beneficence, and grant that a century hence our successors may meet here to enjoy in a larger fellowship the result of our faithfulness, and within a nation not surrendered, but presided over by one Grand Master, heir of the virtues, the hope, and the blessing of Washington. Thank you.